you have and you experience the contents necessarily by way of the acknowledgement. Every kind of category that we can describe in existence has its own perspective, and it just so happens that the category of human, the category of the totality of what the brain is creating with all of its information systems, is this, right? And when I say you, I mean the illusion, or not illusion, but the information that your brain currently has stored inside of it from the perspective that the brain has stored inside of it. So now let's take this and let's actually apply it to how the brain gives us this tangible experience of consciousness. So what I would argue is that so for every piece of information, in order for it to exist, as we talked about in the last little thing, there has to be some level of acknowledgement. There has to be the existence of the thing, and that existence necessitates some content that is being acknowledged by the existence. And again, when I say acknowledgement, it's a placeholder word. It's a placeholder word for the indescribable experience of existing. It's always necessarily, from our perspective, a human perspective, about what this acknowledgement actually is. The individual sense of being a person that arises out of being a physical brain does not allow us to access outside of the contents within the existence structure that is acknowledging the contents. But, like I said, we are the existence acknowledgement content structure. And so you have and you experience the contents necessarily by way of the acknowledgement. So you, as being this whole structure, do have access to the acknowledgement, but you, as being the contents, the individual, the sense of being a human individual and everything that comes with that is trapped in here. And so the way that the brain allows us to experience consciousness is that in the same way that there's a perspective about the paper, as there necessarily must be some kind of acknowledgement about the paper in order for it to exist. And remember, this word acknowledgement is not in the human way of acknowledgement. It's just that there has to be some part of reality that is validating the existence of any part of reality that exists through the structure of existence. And so every single physical structure in the brain has this relationship where there is the existence acknowledging that physical part of the brain, and that physical, and when you take the totality of the physical parts of the brain, what they're telling through a very, very complicated and self-referencing computational model is all of this information here from the perspective that it's generating and creating, right? So it's not just that this information is like written on a sheet of paper, rather there is information about the information. There's information about the perspective you're taking. So the brain has physical components, and in order for any of those physical components to exist, they have to have some level of existence with acknowledgement. And then the summation of these components is also being acknowledged, because if we remember, there's this layering of function. And so there's no like lowest level discrete content within the data structure of existence. And so we can't say, like I said, that there's any existence structure that's individuated. And so at every different scale of the universe, there is an acknowledgement of the perspective at that scale, right? When we talk about an infinite universe, from this perspective, what we're saying is that the contents of the universe is infinite, and in order for the contents of the universe to be infinite, then the structure that supports the contents must also be infinite, and the acknowledgement of the content inside of that structure must also be infinite, necessarily, right? And so even though every individual part has its own acknowledgement, right? So like there's, in the same way that the paper has its own perspective, quote unquote, from like a human kind of understanding, every kind of category that we can describe in existence has its own perspective. And it just so happens that the category of human, the category of the totality of what the brain is creating with all of its information systems, is this, right? Is all of this information, okay? And so when the totality of that information is then acknowledged all at once, that acknowledgement is what gives way to it existing, right? Necessarily, it can't exist without some level of acknowledgement, without something allowing, like not allowing, but it can't exist if it doesn't exist, is what I'm trying to say, right? So there's something, there's some level of it exists, right? And when you take the totality of the information and the perspective that is generated within the brain, it operates in a particular way to continue having that structure stretched out through the universe, right? So if we looked at like an organism or life through the perspective of like the fourth dimensional object stretched out through it, what we'd see is a structure that is warping and morphing, but is sustaining itself throughout the stretching. I think that we have a category of life from a human perspective, but I think that what life is and what, say, a planet is are the exact same things happening. It's the exact same fundamental mechanism that is allowing the object to be stretched out in space in the particular way that it's being stretched out in space. Or I guess stretched isn't the right way to say it. It's being propagated or permutating through the different positions in space as we are, from some perspective, viewing it like moving. And from our perspective, that's time. Just to kind of sum up what I said. So the existence data structure acknowledges every layer of function in order for that function to be able to exist necessarily. And it just so happens that that acknowledgement, well, it's not that it just so happens, it's that when that acknowledgement kind of pokes at the totality of what the structure of the brain is containing, what that state is saying, what we see, what is observed, what is acknowledged is this, is a human experience, is this thing that you are currently experiencing, right? And when I say you, I mean the illusion, or not illusion, but the information that your brain currently has stored inside of it from the perspective that the brain has stored inside of it, that it's created and generated through the information that is then, through the process of acknowledgement, through the necessity of existence acknowledging the contents that's inside of it, providing a tangible experience of consciousness. There is some legitimacy to talking about quantum mechanics with respect to our philosophies, just because, you know, it is the latest, hottest understanding of how the lowest level that we can perceive works within our reality. And so it would be, I think it's just like, it's like we want to use it, you know, like if we're going to be building philosophies that describe all of reality, then it seems pretty important to include what we're observing in quantum mechanics into that, even though we're probably limited in our expertise in being able to properly kind of encompass what quantum mechanics is telling us.